All right, there, A pushers. We're back for part two of our series on the Western expansion. Starting with the Transcontinental Railroad, and how the railroads make a big difference in the expansion and the settlement of the West. So here's our overview slide, kind of talk about how railroads changed. So we look at railroads in 1865, end of the Civil War, 35,000 miles of railroad across the whole country, most of that being noted in the Northeast, obviously, heading from New York to Chicago. By 1900, we have 193,000 miles of railroad. Now, I am not a math person, so I'm not going to try bothering with that, but it's a big increase in the amount of railroad we got going on here. You're going to connect all your big cities together, connect all your areas, and make sure that things kind of work out. Now, going through kind of some of the examples of this, now we'll talk more about this when we get into the industrial and the Gilded Age as well, but there are two big areas of railroads. You have the Eastern railroads, which really work with a guy named Commodore Cornelius Vanderbilt. He's the dude right here, okay, with the creepy guys on his knees, and the guy who ran the two trains right here as well. Known for his awesome whiskers. But he ran the New York Central Railroad and bought up a lot of New York City and connected to areas like Chicago and connected to areas like New York City and Baltimore, Ohio, Pennsylvania, and we connected those areas in the West. Now, the area we're worried about is the Western railroads. And so going across that big area of land, we have a lot of railroads being built. And so you have 8 different companies that get involved in building railroads across the Great Plains and using up a lot of acres. Now, a lot of this money came from federal land grants. The federal government proposed and tried to keep railroads going by essentially gifting railroads a whole crap ton of land. Now, pardon my use of language, but it's a lot of land, guys. 170 million acres. Come on, it's a lot of land we're talking. And so, if a lot of times these companies would take advantage of the land they had. So you don't need a ton of land to put a railroad down. Railroad tracks is about 4 foot 10 inches wide, and a lot of times the land around. They also got land on both sides of the railroad tracks to kind of they could use themselves and sell as they wanted to. And so a lot of companies made a lot of money off this, and you have some things like Credit Mobilier and other companies that were essentially made to take advantage of the rest of the railroad grants and make a bunch of money off it. Now, the big rail we have is something called the Transcontinental Railroad. So it was 2 companies, Union Pacific and Central Pacific. These 2 companies were made to kind of meet right in the middle. And so the Union Pacific was built west from Omaha, going across the flatlands. They had the easy time, right? They employed a lot of the Irish people to build the railroads, whereas your Central Pacific built east from Sacramento, going to hook up with that with the road from Omaha. Now, the Central Pacific employed over 6,000 Chinese people to build their railroads, and eventually they met in Utah. So obviously the Union Pacific had a much easier time going across the flatland, while the Central Pacific had to cut through most of the mountains and those kind of deals. And over time, obviously these railroads will start doing some things that aren't so good. We have forming pools and using fixing rate schemes to work and survive, and that affects a lot of farmers out west especially. You have big companies that will control a lot of the railroads over time, and eventually we'll see what's called the ICC, Interstate Commerce Act, to control the railroads a little more as they get more and more corrupt with monopolies and those kind of deals. The biggest thing we got, ladies and gentlemen, is that you're now a national-wide market. Instead of your local market being in town and grabbing the cow off the street and butchering and making the steaks, you have a nationalized market where you can take food from the plains, whether it be crops, wheat, grain, vegetables, or hamburger on the hoof, load into a train, put it wherever you want to go, and bring it to every place. And so as we have mass production happening, we can have mass consumption, mass shipping, and we have different areas and people specialize what they're making. And we'll also see changing the time zone, which we'll talk more about when we get in class tomorrow. And we'll see investment in kind of this modern day economy we have that involves investing in companies in the stock markets that railroads really built around. We'll give more examples here. We have a lot of robber barons we'll talk about more later on in the industrial age part of this, really get started in the railroad area. And so these railroads, buy up a lot of areas. They invest in companies. They make stockholder companies that are honestly your modern day corporations. And a lot of people invest in these companies, put a lot of money in there to build these railroads and make money off it. They really do support because of government. And government got a lot of direct aid and protective tariffs as part of it as well. So they also guarantee low steel prices through protective tariffs. And it's a lot of this land that they got that railroads had came right from the government. They got it for free, or by working through Homestead Act and kind of using some unsavory policies that exist. Also, labor-wise, life was pretty easy for these guys. I mean, they allowed low-wage immigrant labor, both using Irish as well as Chinese labor to build these things. So these railroad companies built these railroads for pennies on the dollar and made bank off these deals because of that. Obviously, steam engines play a big role in this too, because you're using those railroads use the steam engine locomotives to move products to and from different places. And the railroads are going to benefit a lot of industries. It's going to create the finance industry and that idea of modern day banking and investing. The steel industry needs these rails and engines to make that happen. Steel rails were a lot better than iron rails. And here's why. Iron rails would bend, they'd break, they'd move, and it would cause train derailments, whereas steel rails can move and flex more and would last a lot longer. And so by having these railroads go right to the mines, it could bring new mining products out, so more raw ore and more finished material to the factories, also getting agriculture products to market in the big cities. And so eventually we'll see regulation of the railroads so that these railroads aren't taking advantage of anybody else going forward. And the Railroad Act was Pacific Railroad Act of 1862. This kind of helped the railroads make it work, and Lincoln signed that to make that transcontinental railroad, which they started. And also along the railroad were telegraph lines. Typically, telegraph lines were placed alongside the railroads, running right across the country as well. So now as that land was going, you kind of doubled your money on it. And those lines ran right alongside the railroad, so that you could also not only send people and materials faster via railroad, but also send messages via telegraph that way as well. Now let's kind of see where land grants happen here. We kind of see leaving Omaha and going forward that on about 6 miles or so of both sides of the railroad, land went to the railroad companies, and so they had a lot of control over land grants they got, and they could sell most of that land later on to get more money off of the land they were given and make more money that way. And so you had 20 miles, right, from 10 miles both sides here, and so they got this checkerboard pattern of land. And you can kind of see, where railroad land was, so they could put their tracks down, and the rest of the land they could sell and make money off of it. And so the railroad really made a lot of money by selling this land at a huge profit versus using it for what its purpose was, which was the railroads that they had later on. Obviously, talk about scandals, and credit mobilier being one of the biggest scandals that existed out there. We've always talked about Ulysses S. Grant and the whole issue with the Union Pacific Railroad Company and how different people made a fake company to work on this railroad, and then no work got done. About $4 million went to that company and really ripped off the government. And there's a lot of fake companies got made and ripped off the government this way. But as these groups met at Promontory Point in Utah and drove a golden spike into the railroad to connect the country, all of a sudden east and west were connected and made it a lot easier to get back and forth. Now you can send messages via telegraph. You can send people and supplies and provisions back and forth via railroad at 50 miles an hour versus trudging along behind oxen or horses. And so now life's a lot easier as you travel across the country. With this came a problem of time zones and time. A lot of times you would set your time based upon your watch, where at noon at the noon whistle, wherever you were. And people, because we were going so fast now, times got all messed up. And so we actually had to create the idea of time zones to make that happen. And so as we're going forward here, you start seeing develop 4 time zones with each of their own specific time to kind of help counteract this fast movement we have. And now as we go to airplanes, those kind of deals, it's even faster in terms of where the railroads actually happened. Leland Stanford, obviously you hear of Stanford University, is one of the big names in the Western railroads. He was one of the leaders of the Central Pacific Railroad, made a ton of money off of his investment in that railroad and utilizing the labor they did. Eventually, he built Stanford University, his way of kind of giving back and being a philanthropist and kind of giving back to the area that he had. We talk about labor ready for both these groups and kind of what they had to deal with, and how eventually the Chinese Exclusion Act going from there. Going off railroads, guys, we're going to look at farming for a few minutes here about how the farming happened. So we were talking about some classroom, what kind of problems these farmers had. Lack of wood and water, the bad weather. Not only bad weather that you had, but you also had the idea of locusts, and you would get these huge essentially plagues of grasshoppers that covered all the area and would eat all your crops. They happened pretty regularly, actually, unfortunately, for them. And just the isolation of being so far away from everybody else. Now, a lot of technological inventions help fix these problems. And one big invention was called the idea of barbed wire, just that instead of putting fences up with split rail where it might be, you could use barbed wire fence that would keep animals out and protect your crops and keep your animals where you want them to be. We talk about windmills and water pumps and making soddies already, those kind of deals. Also, you have dry farming and deep plows. So we found new ways of plowing and farming and making sure that you could do different farming techniques, different farming irrigation techniques to make crops work better. And so that's where those A&M universities came in and find new ways to grow crops and make it more efficient for people. Now, the problem is that as machinery comes in, we'll talk about machinery in a second, and makes farming more of a corporate type manner. You can farm more land with less people. You actually crop prices fall, and most of the 2/3 of the homesteads that got placed out there actually failed by 1900 because of low crop prices and the problems that they create as they start farming. And so here are a few of the things we got going on. You see some soddies, you got some locusts, you have our water pump here via windmill. You kind of see the area we're farming. It's definitely a rolling hill area. You have no trees as far as the eye can see, so the wind blows across this pretty easily. And you be very, very careful in kind of how you plow, because a lot of times this grass held the soil in place. Now, as they plow up more and more land, that soil is not going to stay in place, eventually into our dust bowl later on. And we grow a lot of wheat, which is not a crop that tends to hold soil very well either. Now, that sod that's in place is broken up by this guy right here. That is the John Deere plow. It's made out of steel, and this curved edge actually helped break those sods up. And this is the plow that broke the prairie. And we already talked about McCormick Reaper already. The idea we can actually harvest this crop a lot faster than we could before. So now you have this big, huge area. You have mechanized machinery, eventually even tractors, those kind of things as well, to make all this work a lot easier for people. And as we're producing more and more food going to the cities, those food prices start dropping. And we started seeing where those actions happen. Now, we just universities pop up everywhere here. Every state gets its own kind of university by this Morrill Land Grant Act, which helps agriculture in terms of making agriculture better. University of Wisconsin is even one of these land grant universities that they made to add the agriculture program to the University of Wisconsin-Madison, which way you have a barn on University of Wisconsin's campus as part of their agriculture and their short course program they have. So every single state had a farming college, if you will, to help farmers learn how to do better techniques and farm better. Our last idea here is cattle ranching, and the idea of how we bring cattle into the whole deal. Now, this cow right here is what makes American beef market work. That's the Texas Longhorn cow. It was originally kind of herded by the vaqueros. It was a hybrid of cows that were brought from Europe, and this cow was great because it could honestly survive on its own. You would throw it out in the woods for a while, in the wilderness for a while. It would eat grass, munch on that for a while, get nice and fat. You go out, you round them up, find them, you take them to market. And so what you do is you would have your cows that would be out here and be branded, so you knew who which cow was. And then you would drive them up one of these trails here up to the railroad lines in Kansas or in Nebraska. And as you drive them up there, they would then put those cows on train cars, take them up to places like Chicago to be slaughtered and take care of, and then take that meat and distribute it to people in the cities and make lots and lots of money for it. The cowboys who worked were very, very poorly paid. I mean, honestly, most of them weren't even Caucasian in nature. Most of them were African Americans, Mexicans, some were Indians, women. Anyone who wanted to make money could make money because of the long time you spent outside, the dangers of the job, and the terrible conditions you worked with. This process goes on for a long time, by the way, up until 1885-86, when there was issues. You had overgrazing happening, you had blizzards, and you had drought, and a lot of the animals actually get carved up and hurt this way. And eventually we'll see the open cattle frontier change to big ranches with fences over time. So here's our ranching idea. You see our cows we have out in the woods there, out in the grass. And eventually this idea of driving cattle back and forth replaced with large ranches using barbed wire to kind of keep your fences in. Now, a lot of times the farmers and the I'm going to flip back here. The farmers and the ranchers or the cattle people didn't get along very well, because a lot of times you would have cattle drives taking the cattle up north, and you go right through farmers' land, trample crops, those kind of things. So you started seeing more of the fences put up. You started seeing some violence between farmers and cowboys and ranchers, and a lot of issues on the plains. You also had the question of sheep herding, and the big question of should we be a beef country or a sheep country? Because some people felt that sheep were better off as a way to make money and use this grazing land versus cows, and that cows took up too much land, but end up being beef with the market that existed in the end. Can you imagine eating a mutton burger instead of a hamburger? That's why part of this issue comes up. But here you see the grass and the cows and set these ranches up. Obviously you have your cowboy, very stereotypical cowboy here, and here's the three trails you run up to Nebraska and Kansas, biggest one being here in Abilene or Dodge City, as you ramp to the railroads that go up here then to Chicago. Your barbed wire, which kind of seal off the plains and the idea of cattle drives. And it's changed with the meatpacking industry. We can now have a commercialized meatpacking industry that we'll talk more about later on, how this plays a role in this whole process.